Hello, and welcome to an evening stream. So, this week, if people can hear me, we are going to do something a little bit different. We are going to be watching a debate that took place between Sohad Amardi and David French, moderated by Ross Douthat, who is currently standing in frame here. I think I accidentally cut his head off. I don't exactly know how to describe the guy, but he always looked like he kind of had a little bit of a flat head. Anyway, I'm going to let people file in, and we can start reviewing. Perhaps we can do questions first, and then start reviewing the debate at around 7:45 or 8. I don't know. Every time I stream, the boomer. Well, people who are upset about boomerisms are going to be very, very happy. Now that we're watching mainstream conservatives, we're going to be hearing boomer issues that are thoroughly, thoroughly boomer. So, well, that is what it is. I also might do some other video reviews if people want. I kind of usually set aside 2 hours for these things because it feels quite natural. And yeah, obviously, people will realize that I'm really far behind on my video making schedule. And I think that it's tough. I've had a hard time finding good windows to record. I've got a video that's in the works about Jordan Peterson and ContraPoints, and then I wrote the outline, and it kind of got lost in limbo because I had a set of other things that needed to be taken care of in the interim. Although tonight I do hope to release one of my transcripts to a video that everyone really liked a few months ago, a gentle introduction to Mencius Molebug. So I think that that's going to be something I'll have uploaded tonight with any luck. And then people will hopefully give me more time for the rather large video on Jordan Peterson and ContraPoints. And then finally, I'll get around to doing the distributism one in late September, early October. And that will probably close out the channel before the hiatus, excepting a few minor videos I might get done in between the other projects. So anyway, happy Saturday, guys. This is a good streaming time for me. So, here's the first super chat. Patrick for $2. I'm so here for roasting French. He's the worst. I have read many a David French tweet. I have never watched him speak in public. And I watched a little bit of this, and I think it's going to be a really weird experience. And he's going up against Sohad Armadi. I never can pronounce the guy's name correctly. I think he's a Catholic convert, and he is one of the main proponents of the first things type of liberal skeptic, right wing. I hesitate to say conservatism. In some ways, it's almost like reactionary light conservatism in a lot of ways. And yes, people in the chat are talking about it. He wrote an article for First Things called "Against David Frenchism." David French being a proponent of the libertarian. You can only basically David French was advocating the fact that you can only advocate libertarian means for fighting the culture war. We have to maintain respectability and a constant witness. And if we sort of color outside of the lines, the coalition of the conservative will collapse and we won't be able to get anything done. And like most people who have their heads outside various hole-like objects, they were able to see that none of these ideas would really work very well. And so it seemed for a while that David French was just playing this weird type of neoconservative virtue signaling game, and it was really hard to see where it was going. And so this debate, the meeting between the two of them, which I think happened on Thursday, it's been in the works for a very, very long time. And it's, again, I haven't watched the whole thing, but this is just an example of what I think this is an example of one of the few diamonds of things. I know, again, I haven't watched the whole thing, but it is an example of an interaction that even people who are much further to the right than either of these two people, we need to be aware of it. I think it will be interesting, and for this reason, I'm reviewing it just so people can get it out there in their consciousness over what's going on. This is also the first stream I'm doing post my departure from Twitter. I've moved to Telegram, and I'm no longer getting at replies from anybody, which is really disconcerting because I'm sending messages out into the ether, and I can't get any replies back. So it's tough. Anyway, let's just start. I mean, we can go over the week news, answer super chats, answer questions. Once more, at reply mirror won't see them, and we'll go forward from there. I want to, as always, give about 10 or 15 minutes talking about random things before we get started into the main meat of the program. Otherwise, there's probably not going to be much. I mean, it's going to be disconcerting. I had to change the time for this stream once because of a family obligation, and I can understand if people are coming in late. So again, thank you, Patrick, for the super chat. I haven't liked Given French on Twitter. That's all I can say. But then again, I left Twitter for a reason. It's been good for my mental health. I hope it will be good for my overall productivity. If I wasn't, like I said, 3 months away from going on hiatus. Is it 3 months? It's like 2.5 months. Yeah, it's getting close. Yeah, it's scary. All right. So Rob is not a good advocate, lacking knowledge, anti-gun, and pro-immigration. Well, yeah, I imagine that Sohrab is just, and I still don't know how to pronounce the name. I imagine he has a certain amount of blind spots. He strikes me as he's sort of in the middle of new convertism and Catholicism. He seems, and I'm very recently remember how this was. It just seemed like the Catholic Church had all of the answers, and all you needed to do was apply these answers, and everything would get sorted out. And it's not that simple. What do you think? Do you think like ContraPoints will ever end up like the IDW, the internet and the intellectual dark web? Destiny seems to have ended up sort of like that, ranting against leftist audience he cultivated on Twitter. I don't think ContraPoints can do that. I think that Destiny has his own cult of personality around him. And it's not that ContraPoints doesn't have a cult of personality around them. They certainly do. As a matter of fact, it's almost kind of scary how much of a cult of personality ContraPoints has built up around themselves. The problem is that I don't think that ContraPoints has I don't think he has the constitution to sustain the attacks they would get when they break away from the hard left. I think a lot of people would turn on him, and this would kick off a depression spiral, which they may never get out of. And because of this, it's something that I think that ContraPoints will never pull the trigger on. Destiny, he has 2 or 3 people go after him for various positions on non-woke issues. Boom, he's immediately not there. He's immediately striking out on his own. ContraPoints can't do that. They've grown to be completely addictive on the support systems they've gotten from the left. And this might become increasingly a problem because another support system that ContraPoints has is from the mainstream progressive liberal institutions. And if the hard communist left bread tube comes into conflict with liberal progressivism, which it eventually will have to do once it gets more power, then ContraPoints is going to be up a tree because he can't punch left because the hard left will be unvalidating towards them, and they can't punch towards the liberal progressive side because then the academics will turn on them. I just think that this formula, this comfortable place that people like ContraPoints have cultivated, is ultimately not going to pan out in the long term. And because of that, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. If people don't know exactly what I'm talking about right now, ContraPoints, the progressive YouTuber, ran into a bit of a snafu on Friday where they got canceled because they made some comments that could be perceived as being transphobic. And of course, for these people, every comment can be perceived as transphobic. So but because the left always devours its children and because it always has to move to the left, basically a lot of people started attacking ContraPoints. And as many people have said, was this set of attacks particularly vicious for online personalities? No. It looked like, I think Sargon and really anybody on the right has probably received worse than that. But in the process of becoming more popular and probably overly using the block button, ContraPoints has built themselves a place on the internet where they don't face criticism and they constantly get validated and they get addicted to it. And part of the reason why I left Twitter, I felt like I was becoming addicted to it. And I mean, sure enough, I went off it for 7 days, and then I think on Wednesday I Googled my own Twitter account and checked to see responses, without logging on. And my wife immediately, my wife called me on it eventually, and I'm like, okay, right, I can't do that either. Otherwise, me walking away from Twitter is meaningless. But I realized that I was getting addicted to Twitter. For me, it was less, I think, the validation, and it was more just constantly being in conflict, fighting against people is totally addictive. I can only imagine how it is to be like ContraPoints, where like every day you're like, you're wonderful, you're great, you're good, you saved my life, you de-radicalized me, you're my savior. If ContraPoints has to day in and day out hear praise like the praise that he got from that Quentin Reviews video that we looked at the other time, then they're likely incredibly addicted to that type of validation. The problem is that there's no a real way, short of being a pop star, and even then a pop star that's eternally popular, that you're going to get that kind of validation over and over and over again. It's just not sustainable, especially in politics. Eventually, the coalitions you build are going to break apart. I can see this happening too. I mean, since I started this YouTube channel in 2016, there have been more than a few divisions in the right that have popped up. I mean, most notably, even among my own, in my own parish, I'm not going to say where that was, there is a huge division between the anti-Trump and the, oh, well, we don't like Trump, but we'll vote for him anyway because he's pro-life. And this completely divided the community politically. That just happens in politics. And of course, you always want to be in that ascendant group where, because of the political circumstances, you're just constantly building new things, and there's really no space for a fracture or a schism. That's really rarely the case. And I think that if you're on the left, it's the most powerful force in our contemporary politics, but it's also the one that's the most cracked. It's going to break apart really soon. I mean, I don't know, really soon. Who knows? I act like I have some clairvoyant crystal ball, but it's not. None of us know, but it appears from an outside point of view like this is not sustainable. And for ContraPoints, that's going to be a huge disaster because I don't think that they can really, I don't think they have the constitution to wade into a left-on-left civil war. I'll fight a right-on-right civil war. As a matter of fact, I think it always seems like we're kind of fighting a low-scale right-on-right civil war. But I don't think ContraPoints, I think ContraPoints has developed fragility due to their own popularity. And I think that's what we're really seeing with this whole cancellation of ContraPoints thing. Bob Frankley for $15 American. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thanks for your content. You're the one who converted me from my basic normie conservatism towards more reactionary modes of thought. God bless and congrats on the reasons for the hiatus. Well, thank you very much. It's also, well, I won't get into that. It's also the reason I'm a little bit sleep deprived right now, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Actually, being sleep deprived, swallow the word right when I didn't need to swallow it. Actually, being a little bit sleep deprived tends to help you do these things because you remain a little bit more focused for some reason. You're a little bit more on the edge. Perhaps you're a little less distractible just because you have less IQ going on. Blah, blah, blah. But again, thank you very much. Anything I can do to help, that's the reason for this channel. I don't make, well, I do make a little bit of money off this channel, but I don't see this channel as being a really positive source of income for my family. This is mostly just a passion project. And I every time I hear quotes like that, I just want to say, like, I hope I can continue to be a resource for your journey. And if I can continue to do that, I will have fulfilled this channel's purpose. And hopefully, hopefully this transcript of the Menges Molebug talk will help. I transcribe, people are like, oh, release a transcript. And, it seemed like an easy request because there's like these AIs that transcribe it for you. And I had sort of a pretty extensive piece of notes. It was kind of more or less written out in parts. Of course, as you read it, you modify it and improve it. But I thought, oh, this will be easy. I'll just unify the AI script with the one that I already kind of wrote. And then, yeah, the AI made a lot of mistakes to the point where I basically had to rewrite all the sentences. And the whole thing from beginning to end was 27 pages long, which was pretty crazy. It's more than ordinary essay size. So I had to break it up into parts, and I'll be releasing it. I'll be releasing it as once, but broken up. So it's like 4 or 5 different blog posts. However, and it ends up how many it ends up being. Something that's a little bit more digestible for people who actually might want to read it. So anyway, that is what it is. Oh, here's another one. Die Hard Doogie, $10. Hey man, how's it going? I may have forgotten, in your archetype of the soldier, did you distinguish between tactician and strategists? Both fight wars in different ways. Well, I guess, so I am releasing an essay I wrote for my Discord server called Culture War and Content Creation. Again, this is something that's being released very slowly because of the fact that I don't want to release another one before I release my Jordan Peterson video. And so I had to remain focused on the harder to make videos, otherwise I won't get anywhere. And because of this, I basically released a part of this treatise on leadership where I go over the archetypes of leaders, and then the next one will be on how you can form yourself into one of these leaders, the discrete steps you need to take in your own life to do this. And I commented on sort of like 9 archetypes that the right isn't doing. And then I said there's 3 that I'm not commenting on. It was the politician, the spy, and the soldier. And the reason why I didn't comment on the politician, the spy, and the soldier is that I think politics, in the way we've ordinarily conceived it, is more or less out for the right at this stage. And if it is if there are opportunities there, it's not, I don't think the problem with the right is that we don't have enough politicians. I think the problem is the larger ground game that we're not running properly. And I also commented for the second archetype, the spy, that entryism just doesn't work the way it does for the left. And then finally I missed a super chat here, but finally I moved on to the soldier, and the soldier is strange because the soldier is the most important. Like all of these archetypes I have of leadership, they are almost kind of like classic caste roles you might see in any society going back to the beginning of time, like the ambassador, the scholar, the archivist, so on and so forth, the spiritual leader, etc. And the soldier is the most important in many ways leadership archetype. The military is always at the forefront of leading peoples. The problem is that there's no real way to use that archetype right now. So, while it's very, very important, I think, to cultivate the virtues of soldiers and to have soldiers, ex military and military, who are part of this movement, at the same time, I don't know if, I don't think that for doing in your spare time, soldiering isn't going to be what really solves the right wing's problems in this particular moment. I do think that if we were to deep dive into the soldier, there would be a definite difference between tacticians and strategists. And in many ways, this is mirrored inside cultural war politics. I think that the right always is the master of tactics, but it never seems to really understand strategy very well. It always wins all the battles and loses the war. And this is one reason why I think, and I think that the larger strategy in the cultural war is really ruled by content creation. So again, Die Hard Doogie, thank you so much for your contribution, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope I can, again, I can't really comment on. I'm not a soldier. I'm an academic by inclination. So it's I would love to hear your opinions on it more, because I think you're probably much more knowledgeable about that specific role than I would ever be. So, the right flag for Canadian $20. Do you listen to any mainstream podcasts? I know Amari from Commentary Magazine's podcast with John Podhoretz. Also, please consider using Entropy for super chats. They are allies and take a much smaller cut than Google does. That's a good. Oh, well, thank you for that suggestion. Well, I can't obviously change it for this one, but if they take a similar cut, and they are allied to commitments to open platforms, then I absolutely will do that. Mainstream podcasts. I used to be a big fan of Milt Rosenberg. Is he still alive? I haven't listened to him for 2 years, but I always think, like, is he still alive? His podcast continuously changed locations. Before that, it was a radio show, but he was as close as I could ever get to sort of a right wing NPR. Now, the guy was a neoconservative, right? I don't expect him to be, super red pilled, but he had this incredible command over culture. He had incredibly interesting guests, and he broke the mold of anti-PC opinion, or the PC orthodoxy that reigned similar types of long form, digestible content, the type of stuff you might hear on All Things Considered, or Fresh Air from NPR. And as a blue state American, I was more or less raised on a steady diet of NPR. So finding something like that was clutch. Oh, I used to listen to the Federalist Radio Hour. That's, I just got tired of them. I got really tired of them after I caught a semi-accusation of being alt-right from one of the people that normally appears there. And so I lost all time for people like that when that occurred. And I thought, oh, look, this is just, you gotta, I don't know how much I can listen to people who I know don't even want to come on my platform because they're so afraid of my positions. Not because, hold on. And not because they don't have time or something like that, or I'm too small potatoes. Emmett V for $2 says, "What do you think about Jordan Peterson?" Well, that is the topic of my next video. We're out of mute, aren't we? More. I struggled to kind of come out of this sort of standard critique of Peterson, which was, the problem with Peterson is that he's stuck in this liberal mindset where he doesn't understand that individual virtue is not a replacement for collective action. And this largely is owed to the fact that for such a long time, the West they've essentially had a cathedral that was conducive to people pursuing individual virtue. They had a reigning Christian ethos. And it didn't matter really who was president. The incentives for being an upstanding member of society, for starting a family, for contributing to a community, it was more or less the same set of incentives that was put in place everywhere, because that's what was considered to be necessary. And now we don't have that assumption anymore. Now the underpinnings of our cultural understanding of right and wrong are themselves political footballs. And under that environment, the idea that you're going to somehow be virtuous and get anywhere, that's just not really going to work anymore. From the chat, someone says, have you looked into Theodore Dalrymple's critique of liberalism? No, I haven't, but I can kind of imagine that it's going to be very similar to Amari's here in a moment. Give me 1 second, guys. I need to do something. I'll be right back. All right. Sorry about that, people. Yeah, I see someone from the chat mentioning about NPR that it's gone massively downhill. I remember last listening to NPR in 2012 and seeing them first jump on board with the sort of Black Lives Matter fully woke consensus, and just thinking, and just about that time, they took off of air Talk of the Nation, which was their sort of debate show. It was their let's have both sides come on to our show and talk about what's going on, and they never replaced it with anything. So it basically was a transition from a general platform that seemed to be accessible to both sides of America to being more or less a soapbox for blue America to lecture white America and talk endlessly about these pet political issues. Again, there needs to be a word for this, but I think the best word we have for this phenomenon is the Great Awakening. I can't imagine what the what NPR is going to look like 50 or 5 years now, or 6 years into the Great Awakening. It's going to be really rough. Whoa, perennial plant Yaman for $50. Thank you so much for your contribution. What do you think are the most important works by early church leaders that few people read or study? Oh my God, you're asking the wrong. I mean, that's a very generous super chat, but you are asking the wrong person. I'm not an expert at. Well, it was retracted, but I'm not an expert at early church father history. Well, I don't know that. I hope that you probably typed in the wrong amount of money there, but I'll give you my answer anyway. Since the the early church fathers, again, I have a very hard time with. The only one that I've read probably would be Augustine, and the best place to start there is Confessions. Now, I read a little bit of A City of God. I found it very, very hard to get into, so I can't quite comment on that. Obviously, I know a few of my friends are huge fans of Origen, and the problem with a lot of these people is that some of them have kind of heretical tendencies, and they're very, very, I see someone saying Justin Martyr. It's another one. It's hard to comment on exactly where they went wrong, and I'm not an expert on that. But anyway, Clinging Mars for $2. Thoughts on First Things, and would you write for it? My answer to that's hell yes. If they want me to write a article for First Things, I will write an article for First Things. Absolutely. I hope they don't mind me using a pseudonym. Well, I mean, I don't know. I've been doxxed. But again, I'd rather keep my other business and my political business separate. as long as as much as I possibly could. But yeah, I was subscribed to First Things a while back, and then this subscription expired. I think it was a gift from I want to say it was either a gift. It was a gift from a friend, I believe, and I really enjoyed it. There were some very good articles, but I don't know. It's hard when your diet is so online. It's hard to really know what to do every time with a physical copy magazine, and I think I probably let a lot of them just, you know, decoratively line my coffee table, even though I don't think I even had a coffee table when I was subscribed to it because I was in my 20s or something like that. But I read their articles fairly consistently, and they used to have a podcast. They used to have a really to answer a previous question. The First Things did used to have a podcast with Julia Yost, who had this incredibly strange drawl, and not drawl makes it sound like it was Southern, but she had this boring voice that sounded like she was on drugs, even though she most certainly wasn't. And it was sort of like listening to Ben Stein's granddaughter talk about the various business of First Things. It was a wonderful podcast. I don't think that they really they continued it. I think it's gone to being more of a YouTube format. I mean, the First Things podcast was something that was designed to appeal to me, but it's another one. It's other things like, well, who else is actually going to watch this? Like, I would imagine they'd have a hard time connecting with other people, to connect with other more normie conservatives and people who are more interested in mainstream politics. I just don't think it would work. Yeah, Mark Bauerlein is the current host of their podcast, but it's not the same rounds. It's not the same round table with the younger writers. They used to have like Alexi Sargent and Julia Yost narrate the podcast, which was great because you got to see like millennial trads, basically. I think it's fair to call them trads. You could see millennial religious trads talk about TV shows they liked and stuff like that, which are, I thought that was great optics, but apparently didn't sell very well. Or I'm assuming it didn't because they didn't continue it. Anyway, I think it's 8 o'clock now, so let's start in on the actual substance of this distance, and we will let decapitated Ross Douthat go on. He'll sit down and we'll see his visage. But yeah, I will pause periodically for super chats. Let's just keep this going.
But this is a big deal.
That is way too loud for me.
This is the thrill. What was it? The
Melee at CUA.
The melee at CUA. Thank you. Yes. That's copyrighted, by the way. Royalties to David Frenchism Limited.
Okay, so people can tell me how loud the microphone is, but okay, guys, I'm looking at the chat here. I don't. There are some defamations of Christianity that are simultaneously blasphemous and also dangerous to this channel's existence. Don't give me two reasons to ban you out of the chat, please, okay? I mean, I don't typically moderate this thing, but I mean, come on, okay? So let's keep on going. I assume that first part was as loud for other people as it was for me. I think Douthat's microphone is just loud, and I think that's not necessarily boomer audio on my or OBS's part, but rather boomer audio coming from the people at the Catholic University of America. But let's keep on playing this and see where it goes.
So, all right, now I'll sit down. It is my great pleasure to be here with two gentlemen whom I've been reading profitably for many years, maybe more years in the case of David than Rob, 19, but, and already has two children. He's the most pronatalist, no.
I always thought that Ross Douthat looked like Leonardo DiCaprio if you inflated his head with helium and then sat on it. I don't know. I don't know what the look is, but it's sort of that semi-balding, semi-blonde kind of look. Almost a little bit like Orson Welles, but yeah, a little bit like Orson Welles. But really weird looking guy.
But if you're here tonight, or if you've stumbled on this via live stream, or if you're watching the YouTube highlights 20 weeks hence, this is an argument about the future of conservatism, and particularly social and religious conservatism, in an age of arguably increasing secular hostility to traditional religious faith, rising populism of various forms and varietals in Western Europe and the United States, and of course in the age of Donald Trump.
This is just the boring introduction for people who are late to the show. Someone asks, have you looked into Robert Price and Joseph Atwill's theories on how the Romans created Jesus in the New Testament as a means to subvert rebelling Jews in the empire? Well, that's stupid. I mean, I've heard so many of these stupid conspiracy theories where Christianity is a cooked up lie. I've heard all the Islamic ones. I've heard all the new atheist ones. They never pan out. The only thing they do is they just try to cast doubt on the mainstream Orthodox narrative and then hope that you're not going to try to actually figure out what did happen, as opposed to just doubting what did happen and then defaulting to whatever crackpot theory they have. I've heard of people saying that Christianity wasn't persecuted. Well, I've seen essentially primary sources showing that it was. I've seen people saying how the initial apostles were all just big fakers. Well, that the archaeological record does not seem to hold that theory up. I'm not saying you couldn't scoff at Orthodox teachings. I'm not saying you couldn't raise the standard of evidence for believing the Orthodox story to such a high bar that it would fail. But when it comes to actually developing a theory about what actually did happen with the emergence of Christianity, and then at that point, the Orthodox view just, to my mind, seems overwhelmingly obvious. If you were an archaeologist and you looked at Christian testaments as being archaeological records, you would immediately just come to the conclusion that this was the account that you saw in. I mean, maybe you'd say something like the account you saw in Mark, Matthew, and Luke is probably what happened, and then John might be a later elaboration with more religious narratives, because John is so much more later than the other three. But I think that these other heretical teachings, the apocryphal concepts of Christianity, be they Islamic or atheist, they just never pan out in a positive way. I mean, I don't know. I can't preclude a new one from panning out, but at the same time, it's just, I don't know. I don't pay them much heed. After looking into so many of them, I just don't take them seriously anymore. A super chat from Sad FSD. Thank you for your contribution for $5. Robert's Conquest 3 laws don't have a primary source. Not that anyone cares enough to stop quoting Robert Conquest, quote unquote. Okay, yeah, you're right. Robert Conquest's 3 laws are not indeed written down in any book. To my knowledge, they were things that Robert Conquest was just known to talk about when he was among other people. There's not a book that Robert Conquest wrote. It's an apocryphal quote. But it doesn't really matter, because I don't really care that they're written by Robert Conquest. Maybe they were written by somebody in 1969 or something, or 79, who was noticing these trends and wrote them down around about the time where Robert Conquest was writing down a lot of other stuff, and they just got attributed to him. But I don't think that it really matters. They're Conquest's 3 laws, regardless of whether Conquest actually originated them. Just like the Pythagorean theorem, like a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. The Pythagorean theorem is called the Pythagorean theorem, even though he probably did not develop or prove that theorem. So I don't know what to tell you. The authorship of Conquest's laws is not the important thing about Conquest's laws. And that's, but I appreciate the clarification. Yes, they are apocryphal. They are apocryphal. Magical words, for instance, the concept of the magical word that I based an entire series around, it's based around quotes by Mao that nobody can find the origin for. He may never have actually talked about magical words that people can react to. But it doesn't defeat the fact that there's this way that humans behave where they emotionally react and punish or reward certain words, even though that those words don't really have a clear meaning. And if you were to use another set of words, you wouldn't get punished or rewarded. So, regardless of whether Chairman Mao actually said them or not, or whether the same thing's true for useful idiots. Everyone's aware of the quote Stalin's talked about useful idiots. That's apocryphal. Maybe he never said that, but it doesn't matter. The idea of the useful idiot, magical words, and the three laws are so useful that regardless if they have the authorship as they're ordinarily attributed, it's just, I mean, I don't know. What am I going to call them? I could call them the distributists' three laws if I wanted to, but then I'd be a plagiarist, and Liberal Sanity Project would be here jumping down my throat. Everyone calls them Conquest's three laws, so we're calling them Conquest's three laws. So I'm not gonna break that thing. And it even seems like something that Robert Conquest would say. I mean, he was a poet and a political commentator, and he said things like that. So anyway, where was I? Let's just go on with the actual talk. Doubt that's being boring, but let's just go.
And my two discussants are both, I think, from the perspective of, let's say, the normative reader of the New York Times, radical religious conservatives. I think that's fair to say, from the as am I suppose, from that perspective. But they have what appears to be a fairly profound disagreement about a great host of things related to the future trajectory of conservatism, Christianity, social conservatism, and so on in the U.S. And I think I'm just going to start by asking Sohrab the question that I know is on everyone's minds here tonight, which is Habsburg or Stuart? No.
Okay, that's actually a good one. Hey, okay, excuse me one moment while I'm collecting my thoughts. Sorry, so I just got an email. It's my vote's for Stuarts, I guess. I don't know. I know my family would have been ruled by the Habsburgs, but and I went to see the palace in Austria in Vienna. It was really cool. They looked like they were pretty nice people, but I don't know. Maybe something about me it just suspects continental leadership. I guess we are all eternal Anglos now, and there's something really cool about being ruled by the descendants of Charles II. Little known fact: the guy who played Jon Snow on HBO's Game of Thrones is an illegitimate descendant of Charles II. He even kind of looks like I imagine Charles II looking. But anyway, I'm going to let the thing go on.
That's not, sorry. There's going to be a lot of monarchy jokes from me directed to Sohrab, and a lot of mild anti-Protestant banter directed towards David, so I just want to warn everyone in advance. Yeah, so, Sohrab, since you made this evening possible with Peace for First Things a few months ago, start by telling...
Okay, so guys, I'm going to apologize for their microphones because this is painful to watch. This is making, this is making me look not like a 30-year-old boomer.
Start by telling us, what is David Frenchism and why are you against it?
What is David Frenchism and why are you against it?
It seems to work.
Thanks to the IHE for having us, and for Ross for moderating, and David for joining as well. Since this is what I think will be the first meeting of the CUA Catholic Integralist Club, and all of you are members, including David, just for having walked through the door. I think we should begin with three Pater Nosters for the intention of the Holy Father. I'm kidding. No, I did bring, in all seriousness, I did bring David a gift, because I dragged him into a debate. And it was a necessary debate. I'm glad that I did, but I brought him some Kentucky bourbon, just in the sense to first of all, thank you for participating in the debate, and also to thank you for your service to the country.
Yeah, I mean, it is important that these, and I'm someone who's has been very negative on French on Twitter, but it is important to observe these niceties. Not to mention, I mean, Kentucky bourbon. Our household is very much a whiskey household, although maybe it's a little incapacitated in its alcohol intake right now. But that being said, I'll let it go on.
And for your work on behalf of religious liberty. And your work on behalf of religious liberty. And because we're going to talk as two patriots about the common good. We both care about the common good. And these days, you can't talk about the common good without some bourbon in you. So, anyway, what is David Frenchism? I would define David Frenchism as a program for negotiating Christian retreat from the public square into a safe private sphere that liberalism, the kind of totalizing, overweening, aggressive liberalism, would have us retreat into, a kind of readout of various sorts. And I'm not prepared to retreat into a private readout or a private sphere, and so I oppose David French.
Well, that was a little succinct, but I'm going to let it go. The problem is I'm not really doing a response video here. I'm hearing a lot of this stuff for the first time, so we're just watching this together. I'm sure I'll pipe up and I'll insert my own opinions here as well. And of course, you can @chat me or super chat anytime you want.
That was shockingly pithy.
But I mean, I could go on about what inspired.
He's gone on. He's gone on.
No, we'll let Pith carry it, and then I'll say, David, do you recognize your own views in that terse description of David Frenchism?
You know, I feel the same way about that terse description of David Frenchism as I felt about the extended description of David Frenchism in First Things, which was, you torched a mighty nice straw man there, Sorab. The fact of the matter is, and throughout my career, I have aggressively utilized the levers of American classical liberalism to not just maintain the presence of a Christian witness in the public square, to extend the physical presence of the Christian witness into some of the most hostile places in American higher education. I've done that relentlessly, and I've done that, I hope to, at the same time, even though as anyone who gets to know me in a short amount of time, and in the shortest amount of time knows I'm a fallen human being and I don't always live up to my ideals. I also try to do that in a way that's respectful of my opponents, recognizes their humanity, and also recognizes that often even some of their worst actions are motivated by good intentions.
I don't know what it is about how David French looks. I always imagined, knowing that he is from the military, that he would be more masculine, but David French he's always, physically, he always strikes me as like the 60-year-old Dungeons and Dragons player who's going to correct you on some fact about Star Wars. You almost see him saying like, actually, that's not technically true. I don't know. It's something about the high-pitched voice and the sort of the bald with a beard. It comes off as very strange. He almost seems to be coated with a sort of progressive type mood, almost a little bit like me watching Justin Murphy. Justin Murphy is a sort of reactionary thinker in the sort of Nick Land sense, but everything about him is just totally coded as a progressive. And because of this, it's hard for me to watch David French and sort of unify this character with how I sort of imagine him being when I read his articles on paper. But again, we're not into the meat, so I'm going to let the video go.
And so in that circumstance, I have gone into places far from this caricature that Sora painted of me having an airy above it all mentality. I've been absolutely on the ground in many of the most hostile places in the United States to a conservative, small O Orthodox Christian witness, and have not only maintained the Christian presence there, I have been a part of expanding the conservative cultural witness there, and even resourcing it in places that sought to deny it resources. And so what I thought was interesting about this first salvo is my experience of classical liberalism and the instruments of classical liberalism.
Someone says he's got the soy face. He looks just like the kind of person you'd find talking about social justice at a local organic food store or my local co-op. I don't know. It's so strange. It's almost identical to that type of person. And maybe it's just because when we talk about progressivism, we are talking about the heretical version of mainline Protestantism, of mainline Anglos. And this is just a look that a lot of Anglos have at an elder age. But it's strange nonetheless. Usually when I look at somebody and I think of somebody who's more of an older Anglo, I think of someone with a much more calmer and less nervous voice, perhaps a little bit more like Jordan Peterson, a little bit more considered, and the mood's really, really weird when I look at David French.
In American life is that they are the best antidote to the illiberalism of the left, that they provide a powerful weapon against the illiberalism of the left, and even more so than directly confronting and beating people in court, they also provide a powerful weapon of persuasion to sort of that great cloud of witnesses who are observing from afar, who don't know quite what to think, and they also want to know who can I actually like in all of this Sturm and Drang of the American culture war. And so my approach from the beginning has been to aggressively, offensively, but not offensively, offensively use the instruments of liberalism to expand the place of Christians in places that do not want Christians there. And so the idea that I am in any way, shape, or form an agent of retreat or surrender is completely false. It's a product of this weird Trump era that says that I'm an agent of surrender unless I get on board with him. No, I just have a new enemy in him also. And so that's Frenchism.
I don't even really disagree with the points, but it's just the posture and the applause that I want. He hasn't even said a single thing that you could object to in a lot of ways if we're just taking this talk in isolation. But I already want to oppose everything that he stands for, just completely based on the delivery. It seemed to be put forward to elicit just that kind of applause. I'm basically not holding a candle for Donald Trump in any way, shape, or form. I didn't vote for him. I probably voted for the same guy this guy voted for, Egg McMuffin. But at the same time, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be the guy who signals to all the progressives that he's one of the good ones. He's one of the anti-Trumpers. He's not on board with he's part of the resistance against Trump. I have a lot of the same complaints that progressives have about Trump, and I have a few ones that reactionaries have about Trump as well. But I feel zero need to broadcast it for just this reason. I don't want to bash Trump and get applause. I absolutely do not want to do that. And I see that talk as basically attempting to procure that very applause.
Before the rebuttal is rebutted, I think it's useful maybe to have a definition of terms for us to work with. What's your working definition of classical liberalism?
I would say it'd be essentially the values and principles modeled by the American founding and its major founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Declaration of Independence, all operationalized both in the main body of the Constitution, but also in the Bill of Rights and the Civil War amendments.
Now it's your turn.
Well, here's what I mean by the retreat of a Christian vision of the good under the French's model. And I'll try not to use that term too much. You'll remember.
Too late. Too late.
Okay, just
You'll remember, I noted in the piece just in a sort of elusive paragraph that all this was sparked by, I saw an ad for Drag Queen Story Hour in a library in San Francisco. I saw the ad on Facebook, and it just set me off. Now, whether or not, I think I have painted actually a fair description of you, but certainly in the response, you lived up to the description that I had painted, because you kind of poo-pooed, if you remember, David, on a podcast, what Drag Queen Story Hour is. You said, quote, "That's the threat right there. I just don't get it." Now, that made it sound like Drag Queen Story Hour is a small phenomenon and a not very big of a threat. In fact, it's a global movement. It has 35 chapters in the U.S.
35 whole chapters.
Well, hold on.
oh. 35 whole chapters? Well, actually 35 isn't a lot. My evangelical church has got 40 chapters. 40 is 5 more than 30. That means we're winning. I don't know. This is going to be a hard one to get through. But you have to assume that when something like Drag Queen Story Hour is visible and is pushed forward, like the gay rights movement itself, they're putting their best foot forward, and the acceptance of Drag Queen Story Hour, or whatever we call it, you have to assume it's part of a much larger apparatus that plays along with it. The idea that we have to limit ourselves, sort of take everything in isolation, and because this specific thing that's going on right now in isolation can be seen as being small, I just don't know how you can seriously talk about things this way. It's one of the things that makes me think that David French isn't being serious about this. Is he aware of the conservative, this isn't even a reactionary concept, but the conservative concept of being salami sliced, the idea that you get torn apart in small increments. I mean, that's the way you lost gay marriage, David French. Do you remember that? I mean, it happened 3 or 4 years ago. But no, because every increment is small. We can never be aware of large movements that are taking the public. Is that honest? How can that be honest?
35 chapters in the U.S. operating in 13 states and the District of Columbia. These events aren't small events like 20 parents. They often draw hundreds of parents and children. And it is a threat, and it is demonic, because by the description of the organizers themselves, it aims to, quote, promote a glamorous, unabashedly queer role model for kids. In Britain, you can find footage of a Drag Queen Story Hour reading hour in which the drag queen teaches children how to twerk. And he says, this is to an audience of kids, and you can hear like kids and babies kind of giggling. He says, you crouch down into this position, your bum's sticking out, and you just move your bum up and down like that. And the parents laugh, and the kids kind of giggle unknowingly. So to me, that should raise a 5-alarm cultural fire. A sense that we have in a cultural crisis and a moral emergency. That blasé attitude, that's it, just a few chapters. That attitude earned a rebuke, David, from the closest thing you have to a supreme pontiff, Albert Mohler.
No, that is false.
Okay, I had to take a break from this. No, that is false. I am not myopic. There are only 35. I have 40 chapters is more than 35. Okay, so super chat. Hold on, where are we going here? Okay. So super chat for $5 from Gruzy. How important are current historical accounts of the First Crusade to contemporary Christian orthodoxy? Urban's true motives are made a battleground. Well, I mean, so the first part of the question, how? So first of all, thank you for your contribution. The motivations of the Crusades are not important to the validity or the moral authority of the contemporary church in any way, and they certainly don't have impact on small o. They certainly don't have any impact on small o orthodoxy. To my mind, very little historically that has happened since the Council of Constantinople, or before that, the Council of Nicaea, really has bearing on the validity of small orthodoxy. You either believe that Jesus was who he said he was, and then secondarily, you either believe that those two councils were a proper capturing of the early church witness. If you're on board with that, then small orthodoxy is more or less unassailable, at least as far as I can figure out logically. Now, perhaps the question could be better phrased as how important are current historical accounts of the Crusade to the contemporary church's witness? I still think that that's questionable. The church has sort of walked back their support for crusades at all, including an apology. Not that I think that was necessary at all, but be that as it is, that the position of the church is no more bound to the First Crusades than the nation of Mongolia is to Genghis Khan. And considering that Genghis Khan is celebrated in Mongolia, despite having killed many more people with much crasser motivations at more, I guess like 100 years after the First Crusades, which is more or less contemporaneous when you think about it. When we're talking about 700, 800, 900 years ago. So, it's more or less contemporary to the First Crusades. I just don't think it really has a large bearing if we were to hold anyone to consistent standards. Now, that being said, is it important for us to defend the First Crusades? In some sense, I think it is. In that sense, I think it's important. I think it's important to expose people's attempt to put down Christendom by way of constantly bringing up the Crusades. They do this with a large amount of historical inaccuracy, and their attempt really is to separate Christians and make Christians ashamed of the historic works of people in historic Christendom. And I think that's the real assault is one against the heritage and not against the faith. And as I've said in many times, I'm not so sure that practically speaking, even though logically it's possible, I'm not so sure practically speaking you can have a totally disembodied faith. I think that the faith has to come along with heritage in order to sort of be robust in the way that it's been robust in the past. And to my mind, then, it is important to know and talk about the Crusades, or have experts that do get the historical record straight. I think Real Crusades History has done yeoman work on that front. So hopefully that distinction has been helpful. Okay, another super chat. Christian Chad for $5. Thank you for your contribution. Debated a friend on Ben Shapiro. I think he's a net negative. Friend says he's a massive youth audience introducing. He has a Friend says he has a massive youth audience introducing people to the right. Thoughts? In 2014, I liked Ben Shapiro, and then, like everyone else, in 2015, I kind of went on with my life and never looked at him again, short of kind of laughing at Ben Shapiro-owned videos. And then, as far as I'm concerned, in the Trump era, he's had absolutely zero interesting things to say on anything. And really, to be quite honest, I haven't followed any of the Daily Wire people because they just come off as completely boring and not really interested in new ideas at all. I see no reason to go to war against Ben Shapiro because, what's the point? He's kind of... I think the worst thing the right could do is to kick up a huge knife fight between Ben Shapiro, people who like Ben Shapiro, and people who dislike Ben Shapiro. I mean, that being said, I don't. I'm not going to say I really like seeing leftists destroy Ben Shapiro's stupid neocon talking points and then walk around saying, oh, we've owned the reactionaries because we defeated Ben Shapiro. I think it's important to keep a distinction between Ben Shapiro and us. I would just say this. I mean, just keep Ben Shapiro at arm's length. Keep Ben Shapiro at arm's length. Point out the defects in his ideas, of which are manifest, and then just see where it leads. I don't think that people who are following Ben Shapiro right now are going to stay as Ben Shapiro fans in the long term because he just doesn't have anything interesting to say. It's 1,000 times worse than Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson actually has some interesting ideas, but Ben Shapiro it's just a rehash of William F. Buckley but faster, right? Faster and having some understanding of how you play frame games. So I don't know. I don't know about this net negative type deal. I mean, most people who argue for the right, the question is, are they like, if you could blink them out of existence and then replace them with an equivalent, like what are you comparing? To be a net negative, what baseline are you comparing it to? Like if I could replace Ben Shapiro with Nick Land, would that be a net positive? Or if I could replace Ben Shapiro with Tucker Carlson, that would be a net positive. If I could blink Ben Shapiro and his force completely out of existence such that that voice is silenced and replaced with nothing, I think that's a much harder case to be seen as a net negative. So again, the whole analogy of net negative is kind of questionable to begin with. But let's keep on going with this because I need to. It's only been going on for 15 minutes. I'm not going to do the Q&A, guys.
That is completely false.
But he did. Okay. Well, he did rebuke you. He's the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He said, and he was addressing David on his radio show. He said, David, if that doesn't represent a cultural crisis to you, then I simply have to press the question even harder. Answer honestly. What then would it take for you to recognize a cultural crisis? And then pressed by a writer for Slate magazine, Mark Joseph Stern, who asked, well, what would you do about Drag Queen Story Hour, David? You said, well, I wouldn't do anything because it would encroach on, quote, local control over libraries. Oh, heaven forfend. So it's not a description just of, the difference is not just a matter of how to respond to the cultural crisis. It's whether or not, first of all, we recognize that a culture in which children, whether it's voluntary or not, people can do terrible things voluntarily, are brought into a space in which drag is performed. And drag can be, look, I live next to a drag bar, literally. Like it's next to me on the same block in Manhattan. Does it bother me? Do I take armies of young Catholics with pitchforks? No, it doesn't bother me there. But when it comes into interacting with children, with all its subtext of transvestic fetishism, yeah, I'm going to be concerned. Because I live in New York City, I live in the real world, not in a kind of idealized, thick Christian community. And in that setting, that poses to me, and I would say even to the parents who take their children for whatever reason, a kind of cultural crisis that needs to be taken seriously. And your responses to it, the kind of chuckling, oh, how many chapters and so forth, suggest that you don't recognize the crisis to begin with.
I do not recognize Drag Queen Story Hour as a cultural crisis of great import in the United States of America. We have a nation of 320 million people. It is a free nation. Throughout the course of our history, we have had cults here and there, polyamorous communities here and there, people who are doing bad things that I disagree with. It is a byproduct of a free nation. These are choices people make in a free nation. The other day, I was driving to drop my youngest daughter off at a sleepaway camp in a little town called Crossville, Tennessee. It's a town in the middle of nowhere. It's between Nashville and Knoxville. It's heartland America. And across the street, kind of sort of close to the camp, is this odd-looking hotel. And I didn't know what it was, but I was intrigued because there hadn't been a hotel nearby. We might want to stay there when we were going to drop our kids off. And we were asking a family at the camp, and they said, oh, no, you don't want to do that. It's like, why? It's a swinger hotel in the middle of Crossville, Tennessee. Now, two things. One, I'm upset by that. There shouldn't be a swinger hotel in the middle of Crossville, Tennessee. The other thing is, this is a nation of 320 million people, many of whom we're all fallen. Majority, maybe, possibly, I don't know, only God knows, don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the crisis, okay? It manifests itself in different ways, Drag Queen Story Hour being one of the least significant. Here's a more significant. Tens of millions of Christian American men addicted to porn.
Okay, but I mean, but if I think we're going to get to this again. Does he have an answer for? I mean, because if he says let's ban pornography, then wouldn't that fall under the same type of libertarianism, the same type of libertarian objection that, oh well, that's a free speech right, David, isn't it? It's a free speech right. How could you possibly ban pornography? That's what the answer would be. And in order to ban pornography, he would literally have to crusade against our current expansive notion of the First Amendment. I just don't understand this. There's also this whole idea, like the cause and effect. I mean, I don't know. This is sort of the autistic understanding of the world we live in. And I know, guys, I don't want to degrade people who suffer from a spectrum disorder, but this is the problem. A confusion between the reasons and the symbols we use to model why something is happening and the actual phenomenon of it happening. So a flood is happening and you're stacking sandbags, and then somebody says, well, actually, stacking sandbags, all we're doing is confronting the symptoms of the flood. The real cause of the flood is deforestation and the fact that the riverbed's overflowing because the land has become destabilized and there's been poor landscaping. Well, maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But if you don't pile fucking sandbags, you're going to drown in the fucking flood. It doesn't matter what the ultimate cause is. The political reality is here right now, and you're going to have to deal with the political reality. So is it a cultural crisis or is it not? The ultimate cause of this does not actually enter into the analysis whatsoever. And saying, well, I say this, but I have full expectation that Amari is going to say the exact same thing. But it's a dodge. It's a dodge to get around the fact that we actually have to react to this reality. We have to actually live in clown world, and we can't pretend like there's some different world we're living in.
That's infinitely worse than Drag Queen Story Hour.
I agree with you.
There are problems so for now. But then the question that I asked about Drag Queen Story Hour is, because this came up, what do we do about it? Because one of the things that you'll know and you'll understand if you have been dealing with the problems that Christians have been facing in public spaces in the United States of America is that we have fought long and hard to secure, beginning with a case called Widmar v. Vincent in the early 1980s, the right to viewpoint-neutral access to public facilities to propagate our particular message. It's one that thousands of Christian churches use now to provide access to public facilities. The spread of the gospel is facilitated in an immense way by viewpoint-neutral access to public facilities.
I mean, this is such bullshit. I mean, I'm not so sure Amari is going to say this or not, but I'm going to pipe up here. And when was the last time we actually had real viewpoint-neutral access to these things? In the age of Antifa, you can hardly get a controversial... I mean, you would have a hard time getting some speakers onto modern university campuses. You couldn't get Ben Shapiro onto many modern university campuses. And Ben Shapiro is as mainstream as they get. It's ridiculous. First of all, there's obviously the idea of cancel culture and people literally being deplatformed by activists. But on top of that, there's a whole 80-year history of jurisprudence that's designed to preclude people from teaching things like Christianity in the same way that modern universities teach transgender ideology. If we taught Christianity in the way, if modern universities taught Christianity and Christian ideas the way that we taught normative ideas about homosexuality and transgenderism, which is not just some kind of neutral skepticism, but is in itself a worldview with its own ontology and its own teleology, the university would immediately run afoul of the separation of the jurisprudence we have on the separation of church and state. So it's like this is occurring in some kind of autistic vacuum that exists somewhere behind the glare on top of David French's bald head. What world is this neutral public space actually occurring in?
This is an unquestionable absolute fact, and it is one that we have fought for. Now, I don't like that 1,500 people in a year go to Drag Queen Story Hour, or 2,000 or whatever. It's less than the weekly attendance at my church in 1 week. I don't like that. I like to see every drag queen in the United States of America become to a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. I am not in any way willing to upset the constitutional order and to provide governments the ability to engage in viewpoint discrimination against disfavored organizations for the sake of dealing with that menace. You have to consider a larger superstructure, and the reality is that you cannot take these things on a case-by-case basis and establish rules that say free speech for me and not for thee. Because then you better be sure that the me is always in charge.
What world is this in? That's what the left is currently doing, dingus. And it's working quite well, I may add. Yes, that's the thing. Once you have control over the cultural consensus, you can essentially deplatform your opponents. That's what we're fighting over. That's what this whole question is going on. These abstract notions of viewpoint diversity, as we've already demonstrated, are not neutrally applied. And if you can get your opponents labeled as racist, sexist, homophobic, or transphobic, you can make arguments against keeping them off your campus. For safety reasons. For safety reasons, if you do not have the ability, you can say, oh, well, you promote violence against trans people. We're only one or two Supreme Court decisions away from essentially coming up with a concept of dangerous speech that can be kept out of public institutions, even ones that are thoroughly protected. We almost have that right now because of the discretion of certain bureaucrats that work to guard these institutions. So where is this absolutely ideal world occurring?
And in this country, the me will not always be in charge. The thee will be in charge sometimes. And if you have wrecked legal institutions, even on relatively smaller issues, because you hate this gathering so much, it's got to change, it's got to go, there's a price that's paid there. And there's a price that has ramifications far beyond any sort of benefit gained by not having these 35 chapters active in 35 public libraries in the U.S.
I think the typical Frenchian move is to say XYZ is already under assault, things are already terrible, and therefore we can't can't use the public power to at least
What public power would you use, and how would it be constitutional?
Well, certainly, I mean...
I would love for somebody to answer that question one time. What public power, how is it constitutional, and if it's not, do you believe it's worth changing the Constitution?
Well, I could see, for example, a hearing held on what's happening in our libraries, in which Senators Cruz, Hawley, and Cotton make the head of the Modern Library Association or whatever sweat, as they know they can. And what does that do? It sends a cultural message that we're up against this. We're going to fight this because it's obscene. I don't know. You can pass at the local level ordinances. You can organize.
Ordinances at the local level are subject to constitutional review.
And we'll
Actually, the local ordinances can be passed. Look, we have This is just, again, it's from out of this world. And I think that French is going to scoff at the notion that calling someone from a library board or a school board up to the state level or federal level, putting them under the hot lamps and sweat, he's going to scoff at this being impotent because it doesn't say on paper they can't do it, so it means they'll probably will do it, because if it's all on paper, then it doesn't exist. I've heard that they talk about this later, but the most notorious piece of political move the Obama administration did during its reign, well, basically from I forget, between 2008 and 2016, I don't know exactly what year they wrote this, was the Dear Colleagues letter to universities, where the Obama administration passed on a letter essentially urging administrators at the university to look into Title IX and ways to expand Title IX to essentially remove due process from considerations over rape cases that occurred on campus. This had cascading effects, not simply for how rape is prosecuted, but how really literally anything is done on college campuses. And it was done with absolutely no legislation. And that is because power is a thing, and power exists beyond just little words written down on paper. Power are the people who are executing those words, which is why power allows, I can't believe that this isn't being talked about. It's sort of the background radiation of this entire debate. Power allowed the progressive left to completely change the interpretation of every one of these laws David French is currently complaining about. It basically, if Drag Queen Story Hour happened in 1905, there would be a local ordinance, and there wouldn't be a lawyer in the world who would take it to the Supreme Court. It would be considered completely frivolous because we had a different interpretation of these constitutional mandates in the early 20th century. Yet without changing a single law in that time, powerful men completely changed their understanding of a written document that exists to this day more or less unchanged, at least on these particular issues. So David Frenchism completely autistically does a runaround. The main interesting thing that's changed between 1919 and 2019. And we're supposed to ignore the entire 20th century and the history of social change in the 20th century. How can any social conservative movement reasonably do that and expect to be taken seriously?
We'll fight it, and you'll fight it for us. But we're actually going to do it.
No. No. I will not fight for the limitation of the First Amendment.
Let me mention this, so that because XYZ is already under assault, then we should expect or accept the next assault on sort of moral norms. So I want to quote to you.
But you still have not said
quote to you
what you would do about Drag Queen Story Hour besides hold a legislative hearing.
Well, hold on.
Go ahead, and then I'll...
In 2006, you wrote this about gay marriage, David. I know you've changed your mind, but at the time you wrote, quote, "Gay marriage changes nothing. Churches can still speak out on sexual immorality and can still choose not to perform gay marriages. And the gay couple down the street in no way threatens our straight marriages." But certainly for the couple in Oregon, it did pose a challenge to their marriage, David. So I know you've changed your mind.
Whoa! I wrote at length about how I changed my mind.
I know
right?
you changed your mind. But my point is, if
Okay, well, I'm going to let this run then do the super chats.
if in 2006 you weren't woke to the threat that the 2006 version of the cutting-edge sexual revolutionary step will mean for us, then maybe you should sit this one out, because there are a lot of young people who are looking at what's happening.
Maybe I should. I'm never going to sit out the defense of the Constitution.
Well, I'm never going to sit out the defense of the Constitution, Buster, because that's my thing. Oh, I shouldn't make fun of David French, but what? It's just the mannerisms. I can't. Okay, look, I'm going to do the super chats. This is my brain needs a break from that. I hope I didn't miss any ones that happened previously. Emmett5 for $4.99. What do you think about Edward Fesser? Does he fill the role of the intellectual you outlined in your right-wing leaders video? I'm aware of Edward Fesser as an author. Yeah, I guess I don't exactly know. I mean, he's an apologist, right? I mean, that's good, but I think that to interact with the academy, you need to get out of the ghetto of apologism. Not that you can't be an apologist and something else, but if Edward Fesser is a writer, and to my knowledge he is only a writer of apologetics, if he sticks completely inside the apologetics sphere, then he's not going to deal with a lot of necessary right-wing issues. It sounds sort of weird because it feels like we have to put things that are more important to the rear, but I think there's anything what's more important than spirituality in a lot of ways. But it's I at some point this intellectual apologism, it's of limited import because there's no one who's reading it from the opposition. So, but I think, as far as I know, he definitely fills the role, although I think it needs to be expanded in some key directions. It needs to be expanded in art, it needs to be expanded in philosophy, and not apologetic philosophy. In philosophy of other subjects, something that interfaces with things that have occurred in the last 30 years, not directly related to the idea of whether God exists or not. I know it sounds like I'm trying to put this very important question about religion to the back, but the attack's got to get broader. It just has to. Creeper Weirdo for $10. I know I've brought this up before, but I think examining the recent resurgence of nostalgia for Mr. Rogers is interesting and could show a want for the Christianity without Christianity. Yeah, I'm not. That is a very interesting fact. The problem is, other than the movie that's come out, I'm not so sure what I'm really aware of this nostalgia for Mr. Rogers coming up again and again. Maybe I'd see it if I was in the right Facebook group. But all I know Mr. Rogers for is sort of the memes and then this movie that's coming out with Tom Hanks. I definitely agree that there's nostalgia for a more sane time, even for the left. And I think in sort of the liberal progressive Christian thinkers of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, I think they think that they've found somebody who represents basically traditionalism, but in a non-threatening way to them. And I wouldn't be surprised that they come back to that. But that's all I have really to say on the particular Mr. Rogers topic. But thank you for your contribution, Creeper. I'm going to let this go because we're not getting through it fast enough. So let's go.
Never. Okay, so the bottom line is you are telling me you've still not said what legal doctrine you would change to deal with drag queen story hours. Say one thing.
Local ordinances
That are subject to constitutional review. So viewpoint neutrality in the allocation of resources of public buildings should go away.
and cultural pressure.
No, so you believe that viewpoint neutral access to, say, high school classrooms, to auditoriums by churches, to Bible study groups, gone.
No,
Okay.
that wouldn't be the case.
Well,
Yes, it would.
Okay, well, let's just go forward.
Let's try stepping back a tiny bit from drag queen story hours to pornography.
We can never step back from Drag Queen Story Hour. It will dog me.
No, but just, I mean, I think, I guess, I think David's question to you is fair, right? But ultimately, implicit in Amariism, if I may, is the idea that essentially social conservatism or traditional Christianity, whatever category you want to describe, requires, for its flourishing, a different interpretation of the Constitution than the one that has prevailed, at the very least since, I apologize for the echoes, at the very least since the school prayer decisions of the 40s and 50s. Do you think that's a fair, I mean, you're imagining local ordinances that would effectively viewpoint discriminate in ways that I think Supreme Court justices in 1877 might have supported and would not today. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the elephant in the room, is that the Equal Protection Clause and our post-Civil War idea of the Constitution existed for almost 100 years before we came to the uber-secularist, we have to strip away all notions of cultural heritage in order to make these institutions ideologically neutral. We can't veto drag queen story hour even at the most local level because of viewpoint neutrality requirements. It's insane. I guess it's not insane, but it's unhistoric to pretend like it's a ridiculous thing to even want this or to even understand that it's a way of thinking about these documents. We didn't go from 1865 to 1965 with no one having a coherent vision of the document. We changed the position. The Warren Court changed our opinion on what these documents meant going into the period that we're currently occupying.
And is that fair?
We lose 9-0 today.
We also have public decency laws that we actually very often, a lot of them are still on the books. They're just not aggressively prosecuted. In other words, the Bible study may not run afoul of public decency laws in a way that the drag queen story hour might. Obscenity laws, which again we used to have on the book and were only judicially defanged not that long ago, a generation ago.
Couple. How's?
I'll just go ahead and tell you, constitutionally, the typical drag queen story hour would not violate even old school obscenity laws that would be past constitutional.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. Men dressed as women presenting to children wouldn't have violated old school obscenity laws. What are you talking about, French? Like, there were obscenity laws that had like restrictions on women's dress length, let alone Lactatia or whatever the hell these drag queens are who are teaching kids how to twerk.
When has that been tested? Drag queens interacting with children?
You feel free to test it, and you'll find that I don't surrender, and will fight against viewpoint discrimination in public accommodations, and you'll lose 9-0.
Well, at least, fam, we found the one place where David French doesn't surrender, and that is in his defense about how there isn't a single way that drag queen story hour violates public decency statutes. That's the rock solid belief there. Man, he's adamant. He ain't moving an inch from that position. Okay, let's keep on going.
Okay, go to war for drag queen story.
But just
I'm going to war for the First Amendment. See, this is I want no.
Oh,
This is absolutely fundamental to this debate. Absolutely fundamental. We live in a nation of...
We live in a society. Okay, I'm sorry I'm chuckling under my breath. It's so... I don't want to call it autistic. What am I supposed to... Guys, the internet, please. Tell me a word for what David French is doing here right now that is not autism. And I will use that word. But this is a thing, and it's not just in my imagination. This is an intellectual mistake that occurs over and over and over again, where you get so wrapped up in the model and the words you use and the little idea you have of how the world works that you can't see the boulder coming right at your face. And you're just crossing your arms, assuring yourself that you're right. What am I supposed to... I could call it being myopic, but that doesn't really sound very cool, so I don't know. But, I mean, just tell me... I can't not laugh at this.
Enduring ethnic, religious, cultural differences, a continent-sized, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multicultural constitutional republic. There is no circumstance under which any political movement in this country can create a superstructure where the people that you like always win and the people you don't like and you think are bad are always going to lose, and you're going to always like that outcome.
David French. The progressives have already fucking built that system. It's called the modern universities. Everyone they like gets platformed. The people that they don't like don't get platformed. Most of progressive jurisprudence is simply a filter that takes causes that are sympathetic to progressives and reforms the law so that they succeed when it comes to the interpretation of any given piece of legislation. That's what's happened. They already built this thing. Can you not see it in operation right now? Can you not see it in how, I mean, the New York, I don't even know why why do I need to bring up all of this stuff? Why do I need to point out the kind of discrimination that goes on against Asians inside modern Ivy League colleges? Would get all of them with multi-million, if not billion-dollar lawsuits brought against them if it was against another group, namely African Americans? Do I need to tell you that the New York Times would probably be being sued right now if they had hired someone like Sarah Young to be part of their editorial staff, if Sarah Young had talked about black people as opposed to white people? Do I need to list all of these asymmetries in the way we deal with various groups, depending on whether they are a part of the Progressive Coalition or are not part of the Progressive Coalition? Are you opening your eyes? Are you looking at the world we live in right now, David?
And if you try to do it, you'll rip this place to pieces. The only way this place survives as a united country is if we apply 18th century solutions to this 21st century division. Rediscover.
Did David French literally tell me that 1776 was the solution to 1984? You will rip this country apart. Okay, you're applying 18th century solutions to this 21st century problem. Do you think in the 18th century they would have a hard time banning Drag Queen Story Hour? They could ban mini skirts in the 18th, they could ban mini skirts in the 20th century in some areas. This is insane. What Massachusetts colony, if you had men do what Drag Queen Story Hour did, would just sit there twiddling their thumbs as that happened on a local level? You're kidding me.
Cover the First Amendment of the United States. Rediscover religious freedom. Rediscover commitments to due process. Rediscover all of the instruments of change and all of the instruments of argument that we have used for generations to make this country a greater and more just nation. It does not mean it's ever going to be perfect. And we're always going to have people.
Yeah, that's the problem we're dealing with right now. The problem we're dealing with right now is things are getting better. They're going fine. They're getting better. They're just not perfect. And we're trying to shred these laws because an ordinarily stable system is not perfect. That's not the situation we're dealing with, David. And every time I say David, I feel like I'm talking to myself here. But that's not the situation we're dealing with, David. Everybody thinks that this ship is going down with a slow leak. So address at least what your opponents think is happening.
People who do things in it that disagree. But you know what? I think one part of my Christian witness to this country and my Christian mission to this country is to live a value, a legal version of the golden rule. I'm going to fight for the rights of others that I would like to exercise myself. Because I also know that my rights are fragile. And that there's going to come a time when I'm going to need some assistance in fighting for the rights that I would most like to exercise.
I mean, but that rule has a number of caveats to it, David. I mean, if he was, I'm told he's a soldier. When you're in the field, do you give the cover fire to your enemy that you would like to receive yourself? Like, oh, I'm going to fire this rifle at the Mujahideen that I'm fighting against in a way that I would like if I were getting sprayed with an automatic rifle. No, it's ridiculous. The idea of the golden rule has provisions for reciprocality. And we wouldn't be in the culture war like we are right now if we felt that the other side was playing by some set of rules that we had a reasonable ability to expect reciprocation for. The golden rule doesn't work like this, and again, David French only conditionally applies this. I won't comment. Well, you know, David French's hypocrisies at applying this principle to all groups equally has been noted among many people on Twitter, and that's as much as I will say on that front.
And so when you say I'm going to defend the First Amendment, it is Con Law 101. It is Constitutional Ethics 101, that sometimes that means that people you don't agree with and people you don't like are going to have to go to court and win.
I think one problem is that too much of the intellectual firepower of the right has been focused on lawyers and litigation. So, now, all those defensive battles, like I said in my piece and I said just now, I applaud you, David, for fighting those. But often these things don't take place in a courtroom. What the sexual revolutionary left wants is not censorship. It wants self-censorship. It wants people who object to things like Drag Queen Story Hour, which, by the way, isn't akin to just a cult or a weird hotel. It's promoted by every kind of mainstream media power is behind it. So it's not quite that. And what they want is self-censorship and for people to just sort of take it. And that's what I would resist. And what I would say is that as much as it's valuable to fight things in the courtroom, there are cultural battles which can't be fought there, but must be fought there. Because as far as I'm concerned, look, Christianity cannot be just a religion for an elite elect where we create the most kind of degenerate society that throws every possible kind of obstacle in the way of a genuine kind of flourishing of religion, whether for Christians or others. You know, pornography, as you know, running into our homes through our screens. You know, my son, who's now 2.5 years old, statistically speaking, although I'll obviously do my best to avoid that, statistically speaking, he is likely to encounter hardcore pornography before he hits puberty. That's statistics. So the point is, we can't create an order in which all of that is facing the family, is facing true religion, and then say, oh, navigate this landmine and see if you're still among the elect at the end. Christianity is not just this private faith. It's also a peoplehood.
So
right?
hold on. All right.
Okay, that I didn't get this far in the video when I watched it. Christianity is a peoplehood. I don't know if I want to endorse that entirely, because I don't think Christianity is a peoplehood. Christianity, but in some sense it is. Christianity it's almost a super peoplehood. It is a way of organizing various people with one central moral system, one central way of communicating teleology and ontology together. And I think what Amari is trying to resurrect here is what in many ways I've been trying to resurrect, and a lot of other Christian reactionaries have been trying to resurrect, the idea of Christendom. I wouldn't say Christendom is a people, but it's a collective political interest. And that's what French isn't realizing here. You can't play this game without a collective political interest. Okay, so I am going to read some super chats. I got a $2 redacted super chat from I can't tell who. So I'm going to make a $2 super thanks. I don't know whether these redacted super chats, I actually get money from them. I hope I don't. Excuse me. I would hate to take money from people who don't get to ask me a question. That doesn't seem fair at all. Paul Cornelius for $2. Hey man, we gotta meet up sometime. I'm close to you, but further away, because every time I turn around, the prospect of going to and from Berkeley, to and from the Bay Area, I didn't want to. Never mind. I'll shut my mouth. The prospect of going to where you live seems a little bit daunting. Just got here. What did I miss? Well, we're talking about David Frenchism and watching the debate. That's pretty much it. Sorry, man. Boomer moment. But nothing much that you didn't expect going into this. But thank you so much for the super chat, Paul. Anyway, $5 from Patrick said, did you see French shake his head when Rob said drag kids are promoted by the mainstream? Also, French was a lawyer in the military. Well, that makes sense. I mean, he doesn't look like someone on a... I mean, that's still service, I guess. And if you're part of the military, it's service. And service does need to be respected, although I think, making the distinction is useful. At least it explains the sort of vibe I'm getting from him, which is 100% lawyer and 0% soldier. I mean, that's the thing. We can't acknowledge that this stuff is promoted by the mainstream. That's what makes this not like the Renalians or whatever, or any cult that existed in America. This is a cult that's believed by the rulers. And a cult that's believed by the rulers of our culture is not something that we can just scoff at. A cult that's believed by the rulers will in short order be incorporated into the cathedral and the cultural consensus of the society going forward. And then we're going to have to deal with it crawling organically out of every one of our institutions. And we're not going to be able to go, oh, well, it's just a small thing that people believe in. Who knows? If the people of the New York Times and Hollywood believe this thing, then in short order, it's going to organically be believed everywhere because they create the culture. Okay, so Creeper Weirdo for $5 says, okay, how about this video? The Religion of Communism. Well, I mean, that's a great video. I feel like it's already been made by a lot of people. I think communism is sort of a religion. And I'm not so... I feel like... I think it's a great idea, but I do kind of get the creeping suspicion that I'd be reshooting the videos I did on capitalism is magic in a lot of ways. I'd probably be going over those points once more. And hey, they're worth repeating. So maybe after the hiatus, that would be a great idea. I'd probably have to think of some way I could say communism is a religion that isn't just what every mainstream conservative says when they talk about communism as a religion. But yeah. Oh, one last super chat. Die Hard Doogie for $10. Being a JAG, JAG is a military lawyer. I'm not so sure what it stands for, but thank you for your contribution, Die Hard. He says, being a JAG is getting a bunch of drug-addled Marines, charges reduced, and processing them out of the military. His contribution, mostly, is letting the guilty go free. Whoa, that's... Well, you have the experience in the military, not me. So I've heard all sorts of weird things about JAGs recently. Some people have told me that A Few Good Men has done for JAGs what 12 Angry Men has done for juries in progressive areas. It's turned the expectation of the office from essentially being a neutral counsel to being people trying to play out sort of social justice narratives when they really should be just looking at enforcing a specific set of rules. But I could be wrong. Again, I have no experience with dealing with military in this sense, and I feel like I'd be practicing without a license. But thank you for the comment. That does illustrate a lot of things. So I'm going to go on forward through this talk.
The assault on David Frenchism. One of the core arguments you made against me was that I make too many cultural arguments.
No,
okay.
I'm saying...
And then you also said my calls for religious revival or renewal are little more than idle wishes that men would be moral.
Yep.
That's a call.
I stand with that.
I've spent much of my life not just arguing that we need to have a legal space, but then arguing that we have to have the courage to walk into that space and proudly, boldly, and with great grace and compassion and humility present the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's a both and. It is not, you don't win anything if you just win in court and then you're too timid to occupy that ground and to speak boldly. I made that very argument, and then all of a sudden I hear, no, that's too much to ask.
No, I'm not talking about your cultural arguments. I'm saying we need a state and a public order that supports the flourishing of religion, right? It means not just that we as Christians go out there and present our courageous witness, which we should, but Christianity, in the first century or so after Christ, Christianity was primarily an elite phenomenon and some ragtag bands of people that puzzled the Romans. It was only after the Constantinian conversion, right, that the average Roman cobbler could think of himself as becoming a Christian. Now, was he as dedicated as that first, second, third generation of Christians? Did he understand every aspect of the creeds and so forth? Not necessarily, but he still got some benefit from it, and the order that was created was decent.
That's a good point. I think this is... I feel bad because I'm so much on Amari's side that I can't... I feel like it's basically just giving Amari a second voice in this debate. So it's not... I kind of thought I might have more to say to criticize Amari, but if Amari does have opinions that I disagree with, I'm not hearing them here. And that is absolutely true. The political order created by men who lay down their lives for the political project of Christendom is another essential part of the Christian witness. It's not all Benedict. It is also Merovingian. And I don't know there's a way around that. So guys, I hate to say this, but I'm going to be enforcing a rather strict stopping point at 12:40, at 9:40 to 9:45. I have to let my wife practice piano for church tomorrow, and I don't want her staying up too late. So if we don't get through it, maybe if I'll find a good stopping point, we can spend the rest of the time answering questions, and then I'll come back to this perhaps on Monday or Tuesday, and we'll do another Disc Dance and finish out the rest of this, because I'm told that that there is a lot of good stuff to see in the later part of this talk. So let's keep on going now, and 25 minutes more. That's all I can really give. I'm sorry, guys.
So you used the language of culture a minute ago, but fundamentally, Amariism claims that there has been insufficient attention paid to the influence of state power on culture, right?
And I don't just, by the way, I don't just mean this LGBTQ stuff, which are the most hot button things, or pornography, but other dimensions of life as well. I mean, you've talked about this as well, Ross. Just the degree of insecurity that's built into American life, right? For you and I, David, we can have our castles, right? You can pay for a $30,000 a year, whatever, classical Christian school. I can send my kid to a Catholic school, and I can do my best. Even if the Catholic school, if he comes home and says, "Dad, which one of the 57 genders am I can take that up with the Archbishop. I can take it up with the Archdiocese. I can take it up to Rome all the way, and protect my own kid." But for the average person who first of all works 2 jobs, if they get sick, there's a chance they might be hit with a $10,000 cash bill, even if they have insurance and so forth. The whole order seems geared toward making it impossible for a kind of Christian peoplehood or religious peoplehood to flourish, except for elites who happen to live in thick religious communities and they can afford it, and gated communities and so forth. But I'm talking about my own real life in New York City. I mean, all these people live profoundly difficult lives, and whether they send their kids voluntarily to Drag Queen Story Hour or not is immaterial.
There's sort of a Tucker Carlson dimension to this. I think that's interesting. The economic dimension is sort of critical. The the culture war was won by essentially raising the cost of being an Orthodox Christian and lowering the cost of being, well, any number of lifestyles that are situated inside the Progressive Coalition. And that's been the major battleground. But the language of the libertarian doesn't even allow you to describe the mechanism by which you saw defeat in the Cultural Revolution. I mean, I wonder if French actually answers that at any point in this talk.
You know, it's not the real world. So,
I guess I'm going to press David in a minute, but I'm going to press you right now. It seems to at least some observers of this debate that having lost a succession of cultural battles, including arguably the battle over whether drag queen story hours are appropriate for children, that younger conservative Catholics and Christians generally, and I'm sure there are quite a few in this room here tonight who are sympathetic to your argument, have sort of come around to the idea that, well, we couldn't solve the smaller problem, so let's make the problem bigger, right? Because I think when David presses you on what specifically you want to do about, you know, a specific objectionable cultural practice, the narrative, the argument is, there's a lot of space between have Josh Hawley hold a hearing and build a conservative Christian republic, right? And I think a lot of people reasonably ask, well, what is the interstitial activity, and how is it remotely more plausible than David's use of the existing liberal order to defend Christian practice, insufficient as in certain ways that might be?
look, as a stopgap measure, we see a lot of Christians and others, middle-class people, working-class people, have at least found in the politics of populism a kind of protection against some of these forces,
Well, it's allowed us to organize collectively. Like, you only are respected if people fear the collective repercussion of your political force. If Christians were as untouchable as certain other religious groups, which are hard to mention, well, the easy one to mention is Muslims, these problems wouldn't be happening because their opponents would not dare to bring the objections against them for fear of retaliation and counter-accusations. At least in populism, there's a hope that a similar countervailing force can be constructed for our groups, the group of Christendom, the same way it's been constructed in many Western countries for Muslims.
Have they?
Yes.
Oh, explain that.
In the sense that, for example, we have...
They found some enthusiasm for a while, but concrete protection from these forces.
Yes, I mean, judicial appointments under this presidency. And this has been first of all, I mean, if you think about life as the most important value, it's the foundational value, this really has been the most pro-life administration since Roe.
I mean, okay, so, I mean, this is a digression that's going to go nowhere. I can already see from the outset that MRA is going on right now. The long and the short end of it is you have to become a protected group or be able to wield power of the protected group. And if Christians need to coalition up and they need to execute power as a protected group as Christians, or they're not going to have any weight in this battle whatsoever. And if we can't organize collectively to punish opponents, then or collectively to stop our opponents from punishing us, then the game is over. Whether this administration under Trump has nominated more or less judges than were nominated under George W. Bush is really immaterial to this matter. It's more of a psychological difference. We need to psychologically imagine a collective interest, and short of that, there's really nothing else to be said.
And David, you're on the record saying we need to defeat Trump at the ballot box. You wrote that in the Time column a couple of times.
Oh, I've said that so many times.
Sure, but hold on. But that would mean plausibly Senator Bernie Sanders, who today, or was it yesterday, suggested that one of the world's problems is that too many poor people are having children. And so, we should promote contraception and abortion and do away with the Mexico City rule. So that's, look, as a baseline matter, when voters are standing up against this overweening, totalizing kind of liberalism that I'm talking about, you would have them settle for Bernie. What would Bernie's judicial appointments look like?
So I know a little bit about the judiciary, and
well, it's the smugness, man. It's always it seems this is how he talks like progressives talk. I don't exactly know what it is about him. I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe when we return to this video on Tuesday, we'll be able to actually take things forward a little bit more. But he talks in this weird way. No.
One of the things that I know and I understand is that the advances that we have made in the First Amendment and religious liberty in this country, which have been pretty stunning. In the early 1980s, a lot of people don't realize this, it was an absolute open question as to whether or not a religious student group could use an empty classroom at a public university to hold a meeting. That was an open question. The question was, would that be violate the Establishment Clause for a public university to provide an empty classroom? That was one. I can go down the line for 35 years in front of Republican appointees and Democratic appointees and chronicle the advance of individual liberty in the First Amendment over a 30-plus year span of time. A remarkable achievement in clearing the way almost all the time for our groups to speak that you would absolutely love, delivering messages that you would absolutely love, as opposed to some few that do not.
I mean, would you characterize the last 30 years as one of advance for Christian people, David? I know that's what he wants to present, and I'm not saying that they weren't significant victories in a sense. But advance is not what anyone is feeling right now.
And I have learned something in the course of a quarter of a century of litigation, and that is these battles are not won and lost in any one presidential cycle. They're not. I've been a pro-life, I started what I think was the first dedicated pro-life club at Harvard Law School back in 1992. It's called the Society for Law, Life, and Religion. So students in here, whenever you form a club, please think of the acronym and how people say it, because for the next 25 years, I had founded SLUR at Harvard. So I've been a part of at the grassroots of the pro-life movement. I made a pledge shortly after I got back from Iraq when I was a senior counsel at the Alliance Defending Freedom that Students for Life for America, one of the most effective pro-life grassroots organizations in the United States, if any one of their students anywhere in the United States had a legal issue, we would represent them for free, and we kept that promise. So here's what I've seen about our cultural battles. If you win in the culture, any given election, it's not so indispensable. 1981, the abortion rate peaked in this country. 1981. It went down during pro-life President Reagan. It went down in pro-life President Bush. It went down in pro-abortion rights Bill Clinton. It went down in pro-life George W. Bush.
And that's because you won the culture, David? You won the culture on abortion, not just contraceptives got better?
I disagree that Trump is the best pro-life president. Bush signed pro-life legislation Trump will never be able to sign. Obama, it went down during the Obama administration. In the last 5 years of the Obama administration, more pro-life laws were passed at the state level than were passed in any period of time in American history since Roe. The abortion rate right now is below the point it was when Roe was decided, when abortion was illegal in some parts of the United States of America. It is still a horrible tragedy. But the idea that we cannot make a massive public difference, even when presidents go back and forth and change back and forth, is completely false. And what we end up doing all the time is we catastrophize and magnify these presidential elections to the point where we will do what we have done with Donald Trump. All too many people, certainly I'm sure not anybody in this room, but defend conduct that you never would have defended before, wreck your public moral witness for people who are outstanding outside of the Christian faith. Because why? Well, the state of the Republic's at stake. Flight 93 election. You know, I think it's more like this. The plane is going through turbulence. People charge the cockpit, choke out the pilot, get in the seat, and they're like, oh, that was just turbulence. Oh.
So it's stay the course. 1,000 points of light, stay the course. I feel like if we redid this debate on Saturday night, if America was reborn in reactionary fury and Saturday Night Live was taken over by reactionaries, maybe we could get Dana Carvey to play David French here. That would be pretty entertaining because I think he'd do a spot-on job. He kind of has like a Garth look about him, doesn't he? I could totally see it. Well, I don't know. It's this thing again that, like, if you support Trump and you defend him as a politician, you therefore necessarily defend his conduct, which is not true. That's a jump. And therefore, you defend his moral witness. What? When has that ever been the case for political rulers? In the medieval ages, Clovis was an utter barbarian, and the church supported him because he didn't oppress Christians. And then Charlemagne fathered a whole horde of legitimate children with God knows how many mistresses. And the church crowned him because he was essential to the political project of spreading the word. That wasn't an endorsement of his behavior. That was saying, we need you here in this position because we understand that politically, Christendom has a mission that's bigger than your sins. And starting a war or completely capsizing our civilizational coherence is not... It's not something that we're going to let you having an affair stand on. And, you know, I understand that well then, Dave, why did we draw the line for Henry VIII? If we let Charlemagne and Clovis just water under the bridge, why do we draw the line? I think that this is a prudential decision that has to be made. I think in Henry VIII's time, because doctrine was such an important thing, as was demonstrated by Henry VIII's own career as a Catholic apologist, it was paramount that the church actually take a stand on some things, like publicly getting married in contravention of the divorce regulations. The church wasn't excommunicating Henry for having an affair with Anne Boleyn. But anyway, these are things. But it's necessary to have an awareness that this is a thing. And French doesn't seem to have that awareness.
Oh, crap. What do we do now? And what we've got is a situation where we are taking each one of these presidential elections, elevating them in importance to such a degree that it's justifying all kinds of garbage coming from the body of Christ. I mean, you know, this very idea that civility and decency should be a second-order value, I want to hold you to that. That's not biblical. It's not biblical. The command to love our enemies, the command to treat people with kindness, these things are not tactics to abandon in the face of a Hillary Clinton presidency or when you need to own CNN on Twitter. These are fundamental moral obligations that have eternal resonance. And what we've done is we've taken this news cycle based in these cycles of presidential elections and said they're so vital. They're so vital, we're going to ditch so many of the other things we used to argue with full sincerity because it's an emergency. It's an
David,
emergency.
I live in New York City where more black babies are aborted than are born. That's an emergency. I aim to stop it. I won't listen to this kind of cheap moral.
How are you going to stop it?
Well, I think
for starters, for not helping elect one of these infanticidal
But
Democrats.
so let me pause on this point because I think there is a really important disagreement here, potentially, and I'll ask Sarab if he thinks this
You
is
mean
fair.
we finally got to a disagreement?
I think we're doing pretty well. It's moderation is a delicate art. The story that you told focusing on religious liberty jurisprudence and the abortion rate and pro-life legislation is an optimistic story. It's a story of pro-life gains, it's a story of Christian legal gains, and it's a story I've heard you tell eloquently before. I think it's fair to say that it's not the story that a lot of conservative Christians associate with the last 30 years. Not that they would deny that there have been real pro-life gains, not that they would deny that you've won courtroom victories, but there is a narrative that I think is grounded in some plausible social science data that the period in which you've won courtroom victories has been a period of decline in religious practice, decline in religious belief, decline in Christian influence over the culture, decline in Christian political power, a decline that has led in part to the ascent of a presidential candidate, now president, who you abhor, whose ascent wouldn't have been possible absent that decline. And I think a certain amount of Amariism, and I'll let you say if you think this is right or not, is rooted in a view basically that the gains that have been made are insufficient to the scale of the defeats that have been incurred.
There are rumors abounding, David. There are rumors abounding that maybe we're not winning the culture war. Okay, guys, we're at the halfway point of this video. I'm going to have to quit the video here and take it up at the 43-minute mark when we come back on Distance. I'm going to take the next 6 minutes to answer any remaining questions, to talk about things going forward. So please, your last super chats the next 2 minutes if you can. We'll sort out whatever is going on with the canceled super chats later. I have to go and deal with some other stuff myself. Life's getting busy. Life's getting busy, fam. I really appreciate everyone who tuned in, and we'll be doing another Distance in violation of my own policy to not do like 4 Distances in a row. But this is just, considering I'm so close to my hiatus, I just got to produce stuff when I can and when I feel like I have energy. So that is what it is. I see one Key Witch. Hey, how's it going, man? Glad to see you back here. New Zealand $10. In low trust, diverse societies, the golden rule goes out the window. How is one to expect to be done upon oneself when diversity is seen as an absolute good? French argues to weaken that fabric. Yes, that's true. I would say less that the golden rule is weakened and more that the golden rule has sort of known caveats that get enlarged when we're in a diverse society. You cannot throw your collectivity under the bus when you're inside a situation where there's other groups that are threatening to take political power. If you say like, oh, well, I'll sacrifice my own children's well-being so that the other group can thrive, you're dead. You're dead. You're dead. There is something to be said for practicing the golden rule in an extreme sense at an individual level, and especially when it comes to joining a monastery or a religious order, but it's just not the same thing when it comes to collectivities. And so the purview of the golden rule has to be adjusted through the knowledge that a golden rule is not an invitation to essentially enslave yourself, or especially not to enslave your children. And so although we might see ourselves as enslaving ourselves to God, practicing sort of radical altruism on the individual level, it's just, there's caveats to the golden rule that apply more and are more obvious inside highly diverse societies. And I think that's sort of what we're tripping over right now, because we were in such a morally homogenous society for so long that we're just now being able to recognize radically non-Christian political forces as being forces that are autonomous and have volition unto themselves. And I think this is something that David Frenchism is just not, it's really never taken stock of this fact. So Space Kissinger, well, I love that title, Space Kissinger for $5 from an unwashed Adventist. I appreciate your work and thoughts. Well, thank you very much for that contribution. Yes, it's we'll return to this video in the future. We're right at the 2 hour mark, so thank you everyone for tuning in. And it was been a really good live stream. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope I answered everyone's questions to their satisfaction. But this video is just a little too long for us to get through, and we'll have to come back to it on Tuesday when I have time to stream again. So we'll have to let the Amari French stream rest for the time being. And I've gotten a good laugh on myself. In the meantime, I'll be working on the Jordan Peterson and ContraPoints video. Hopefully, ContraPoints doesn't take further descents down the spiral of despair after being canceled this Friday, because some amount of stability on both of these characters would be appreciated as I make the video. Obviously, I hope they don't do anything that's super self-destructive, just appreciating themselves as Imago Dei right there. But in the meantime, I need to let my wife practice for tomorrow's Sabbath celebration. So everyone have a blessed Sunday, and I hope to see all of you in the comment section because I'm no longer on Twitter. And feel free to drop me a line on Telegram because I really appreciate people talking to me there. It's a much easier way to sanely communicate with people than Twitter is, at least in my non-relapse journey away from Twitter for the time being. So again, thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks for generosity on the super chat. I hope to see you guys all later. God bless.